Back in high school, Johnny was beaten to a bloody pulp. His face bore the imprint of my recent slap. He looked up at me, his pitch-black eyes icy and melancholic. Everyone said that in the future, when Johnny rose to power, the first person he would deal with would be me. But they didn't know that the future Johnny would give up dignity, life, and everything for me. Just to be a dog by my side. On the 395th day after my death, I was reborn. Before I could react, a deep, hoarse voice reached my ears. Had enough, I looked down in astonishment to see Johnny half kneeling on the ground. And in my hand, a blood-stained whip was held high. I stared blankly. Johnny in his youth was thin, revealing his beautifully shaped collarbones under the torn collar. Johnny was undoubtedly good-looking. But his naturally cold eyes and the aura of melancholy that surrounded him made people genuinely loathe him. Especially, even when he was beaten all over by the whip, he refused to show weakness. He stared into my eyes fiercely. "Selena, have you really treated me like a dog?" My eyelid twitched, and I heard him coldly laugh. "Even if I die, Johnny will never bow down to you." He spoke with such determination, as if preparing for battle. I couldn't help but think back to my past life when my family went bankrupt, and I was killed by my father's enemies. At that time, Johnny was hailed as the world's youngest physicist and immediately returned to the country upon hearing of my death. Accustomed to pens and papers, he wielded a knife for the first time and stabbed to death the man who had killed me without hesitation. He brought my body back from the mortuary to the mansion. Like a madman, he set the mansion on fire and committed suicide. My soul hovered in the air, surrounded by smoke. Johnny wrapped a dog collar around his wrist and looped the other end around my hand. The coldness in his eyes seemed to melt in the firelight, revealing a strange tenderness. He held my body in his arms and lowered his head self-deprecatingly. "You said I was your pet. Even in death, you won't abandon me, right?" Johnny and I were consumed by the fire. I saw through this guy. Even if he became a physicist, he couldn't even bear to buy me an urn. Remembering the events of my past life left a bitter taste in my mouth. I tossed the whip aside listlessly. Johnny clenched his fists, gritting his teeth. "What? Haven't had enough fun? Too bad, I can't make you feel any fear." I raised an eyebrow and lifted his chin. "Johnny, do you perhaps like me?" His youthful chin tensed instantly. The next moment, he hoarsely taunted, "Have you forgotten our relationship? Johnny was my half-brother." I lightly kicked Johnny's kneeling knee and walked past him gracefully. "So what if we are siblings? Who knows if you're a pervert?" Johnny's gaze suddenly turned icy. At the age of 9, I met Johnny for the first time. My father said Johnny was my brother and asked me to get along with him. Just after my mother's death, I hated the annoying illegitimate child. On Johnny's first day moving in with us, I nearly drowned him in the lake. Leveraging my heart condition, my father couldn't bring himself to truly punish me, so he used various means to torment Johnny. But it was futile. My father still saw him as the heir to the family. Until the news broke that Johnny was just an orphanage reject, unwanted by anyone. No blood relation to me. Seeing this path was a dead end, my father forced me to marry Johnny. I threatened Johnny to refuse the absurd marriage, and he went abroad alone. He only returned to the country after my death, hastily providing himself as a companion for my funeral. The nightmares of Johnny's childhood were probably me. But even so, after gaining power, he never harmed me in the slightest. Honestly, I should repent for the wrongs of my past life, perhaps even apologize to Johnny. But unfortunately, I was a wicked woman without a conscience. After being reborn, I felt much clearer in my mind, yet inexplicably constrained by a certain rule. I had to maintain the same temperament as in my previous life. Only this way could I live a healthy life. In my past life, until my death, I was always frail. Oh, how I yearned to have a lively body. A beautiful and malicious wealthy young lady, I played my part to the fullest. But now, looking at the blank pages of the test paper made my head ache. I sighed and prepared to go downstairs to clear my mind with some fresh air. Suddenly, I saw Johnny gulping down cold water by the water dispenser. Johnny had been badly beaten and hadn't come down for dinner that evening. My father was strict with us. If we missed a mealtime, we couldn't expect to eat anything else. And Johnny never had any pocket money. Hungry? Seeing me, Johnny gripped the water cup tighter, his wolf-like eyes particularly chilling in the night. But I wasn't afraid at all. With arms crossed, I smirked, "Drink water when you're hungry, and lick your lips when you're craving." Johnny didn't even raise his eyelids, turning back to continue filling his water cup. His throat moved as he gulped, a surprisingly sexy sight. I threw the stuffed toy in my arms at him, and it rolled into my room. Nonchalantly, I walked upstairs. A few seconds later, I heard his slow footsteps behind me. The room's light was blinding, and Johnny stood in the doorway with his eyes slightly squinted. Not entering, I rummaged through the cabinet to find bread and milk, tossing them all to him. Eat. Johnny's gaze was icy. What are you up to now? Don't bother finding a trash can, don't think about leaving until you finished. Perhaps Johnny was weakened from his injuries, as he was easily pulled into the room by me. He then tore open the packaging and took a hearty bite. His slender cheeks puffed up with the bread, his eyes fiercely focused yet oddly serious. I twirled the tiny whip in my hand, glancing at the blank test papers on the table. Have you finished your homework? Johnny glanced at me indifferently, not saying a word. I boldly pushed all the papers toward him. Help me with my homework. If you don't finish, don't think about leaving this room. Johnny suddenly raised his head, his eyes showing a subtle fluctuation. Suppressing my discomfort, I leaned close to his ear and maliciously threatened him. Do the homework. After all, you wouldn't want me to beat you to a pulp again, right? I poked his shoulder lightly with the whip, and a muffled groan came from between his teeth. Almost instantly, his ear turned bright red, flushed as if it were about to bleed. Were you hurt at that spot? I poked gently twice more. Johnny's shoulders started to tremble from the pain. Just as I was about to speak, Johnny suddenly turned and grasped my wrist. I raised my head in surprise, meeting his trembling eyelashes. A glistening layer of moisture covered them, and his typically black and icy eyes flickered with intense excitement. Big brother. Is that really you? I whip you a couple of times, and you're enjoying it? Shocked by my gaze, he turned away in embarrassment, silent, and walked out. His retreating figure seemed flustered. The homework remained unfinished, and when the class monitor came to collect the assignments, I handed over a bundle of air. The bell for class rang, and the math teacher began reviewing the assignments. I was prepared to be punished for not completing mine, but to my surprise, he called Johnny's name. Where's your homework, Johnny? Forgot. Before the teacher could say anything, he skillfully picked up his textbook and stood outside the classroom, as was the usual penalty. The math teacher was furious. You guys are all acting like Johnny, relying on your good grades, and not even doing your homework. After a scolding, the teacher handed out the test papers and began the lesson. I hadn't handed in my homework, but the class monitor handed me a fully completed test paper with the name Selena written on the left side. I had seen that name many times in the past when I raged at Johnny and tore his textbooks. Johnny had turned in my homework for me? I couldn't help but glance out the window. In the scorching August summer heat, standing outside for less than 5 minutes would have caused one to be drenched in sweat. Yet there was Johnny, standing straight against the wall like a sturdy pine tree. Sweat dripped from his chin into the wound on his neck, but he didn't flinch, his lips tight, his eyebrows unwrinkled. Aloof, enduring, and surprisingly resilient. After class, he silently returned to the classroom, burying himself in the test paper. A hand waved in front of my eyes. Selena, why are you looking at that watchdog out there? Take a better look at me. The playful smile of a boy suddenly loomed large before me. I hesitated for a moment, then physically recoiled and turned my head away in disgust. Peter, how did I forget about this scumbag in my past life? Against my father's objections, I was with him, but he showed up with his lover right after my family went bankrupt. In an argument, he choked me to death and sent his lover to jail to take the blame. Thinking back now, I was really blind. Seeing my almost nauseous reaction, Peter quickly offered his hand to me. His face was apologetic. If you feel sick, you can vomit in my hand. It's okay, I don't mind. I raised my hand and gave him a big push. Peter covered his face incredulously. Selena, you. His good friend, infuriated, came looking for me to confront me. I raised my palm high. Don't get involved, who gets hit gets hit. As the words fell, a wave of unprecedented comfort spread throughout my body. Even the stifling sensation caused by my heart condition had dissipated. Is this the power of being a malicious supporting female character? Peter was indeed a ninja turtle. Even after being slapped in front of everyone, he could act as if nothing had happened, and, after school, he even invited me to his birthday party with a smile. In my previous life, I happily accepted the invitation, but Peter said I couldn't drink alcohol and considerately kept pouring me drinks, which turned out to be even stronger than white wine. Caught off guard, I was drunk by Peter. He never expected that Johnny was following me. Just as he was about to undo the first button of my collar, Johnny suddenly burst in and punched Peter hard in the face. When I woke up, Peter, the villain, had already framed me. Believing him, I went home and unreasonably whipped Johnny a few times. Consumed by anger, I was extremely disgusted with this illegitimate brother, and my actions were brutal. Johnny, sweating profusely, lay on the ground like a dead dog, staring coldly at me without saying a word. As I was pondering the nonsense things I did in my previous life, my wrist was touched. Peter nervously asked, "Selena, will you come?" Resisting the urge to slap him, I replied, "Of course. I still need to give you a birthday present." Peter left satisfied. Although Johnny noticed the commotion, he didn't even raise his head. It didn't matter, I would take the initiative. After school, I cornered him in the classroom. Johnny seemed accustomed to occasional taunts and teasing, not even lifting an eyelid. Peter invited me to his birthday banquet. "Should I go?" Johnny, with a cold gaze, replied, "It's up to you, it has nothing to do with me." Ignoring his response, I playfully patted Johnny's head, as if patting a little puppy, and invited him to come along. "Why should I?" Johnny stiffly avoided me, his expression unusually cold. Sighing, I said, "If you don't go, what if Peter bullies me? I'll be all alone, how pitiful." "That's your own fault," he replied. With a sarcastic smile, I took out a small whip from my bag and snapped it on the table, making a crisp sound. "If you behave, I can satisfy you tonight." Not sure which nerve this statement hit, Johnny followed me in silence. Entering the private room, Peter's face hardened when he saw Johnny. "Selena, bring this troublemaker over, it's a downer." Peter never liked Johnny. Whenever Johnny was around, he was always second best. Peter's sister, Kathy, stepped out from behind him. A Columbia University high achiever, gentle and understanding. Occasionally, she would stand up for Johnny when he was oppressed by Peter. Not long after Johnny went abroad, she followed suit and studied abroad. Later on, it was rumored that Kathy became Johnny's assistant. She frequently posted photos with Johnny on social media. It was then that I realized behind the calm facade, she harbored a secret crush on Johnny. Was his presence today due to concern for me or to see Kathy? I glanced over. Kathy politely greeted him, and Johnny's icy demeanor softened a bit. The group suggested playing truth or dare. The bottle pointed to Johnny. How did it end up on him? Boring. "Johnny, why don't you imitate a barking dog for us?" Someone teased. Annoyed, Johnny disregarded the taunts and insulted Peter under his breath. Kathy gently suggested, "How about you choose the truth? I won't make it difficult for you." She asked, "Johnny, do you like any girls?" Johnny glanced at her and then gulped down the contents of his glass in one go. Perhaps it was his first time drinking, as he coughed from being choked by the alcohol. His voice hoarse, he replied, "No." Kathy was taken aback, a hint of bitterness in her smile. As the game continued, Peter slyly directed the bottle towards me. Since Johnny had chosen truth earlier, it was my turn for a dare. "If you don't want to dare, then drink," Peter whispered, reassuring me that it was only soft drinks, not alcohol. Coldly, I pushed the glass back. "Let's play something bigger." "Selena, dare to kiss one of the guys here?" The men leered at Peter with suggestive expressions. Kathy observed with a shallow smile, while Johnny looked distant, his aloof expression inscrutable. Ignoring the provocations of the others, I bravely kissed Johnny, albeit intending for it to be a faint peck on the collar. Unexpectedly, Johnny raised his head, and I was unable to pull back in time. Our lips met, soft and warm, an unexpected sensation. Confused, I heard the sound of shattering glass. Johnny, with blood on his hands, gazed into my eyes for a moment, his pupils trembling. "Selena?" He spoke softly, his hand reaching to touch my face, but then dropping back down. A self-deprecating smile crept across his lips. Before I could comprehend his odd reaction, Peter rushed in, holding a bottle of alcohol, swearing and threatening to harm Johnny. Could Johnny survive a blow from the bottle? Without hesitation, I grabbed Johnny and ran for our lives. Johnny's eyes seemed unfocused, and I dragged him along like a puppet, fleeing until we turned a noisy street corner and disappeared into the dark alley. Suddenly, Johnny gripped my shoulders, pinning me against the wall. In the moonlight, his eyes locked onto my face inch by inch. I felt a shiver down my spine. He decisively kissed me, with chaos and intensity in his actions. When I tried to push him away, he held my wrist firmly above my head. Despite my struggles, the physical discrepancy between a man and a woman kept me trapped. Are you rebelling, Johnny? He released me abruptly, almost as if on reflex. Seizing the opportunity, I wriggled out of his grasp and swiftly kicked his calf before making my escape. I thought he would chase after me. But he didn't. After running a considerable distance, I looked back. Johnny had collapsed at the entrance of the alley, seemingly unconscious. Approaching cautiously, I poked his shoulder. "Stop pretending to be dead." His eyes remained shut, but he grasped my fingers tightly, pressing them against his chest. As I drew closer, I heard his faint murmurs. He repeated 2 words over and over, Selena. Moving Johnny back to the room. It was already late at night. The family doctor checked on him, diagnosing alcohol intoxication, fever, and inflamed wounds. Nothing serious, just advised to rest well. Trying to probe, I asked, shouldn't you have another look? Could there be a serious problem in your brain? How else would you act like a different person in the alley? Classic signs of schizophrenia. After an antipyretic injection, Johnny opened his eyes soon after, still flushed. The harsh white light in the room made him appear more pitiful. Johnny? His eyes shifted, and he immediately took my hand, his tipsy gaze smiling foolishly at me. His lips were rosy and smile infectious, even the corners of his eyes were tainted with a beautiful red. I've got Selena. Drunk Johnny seemed muddled, showing an impossible sense of obedience and cuteness in his rare moment of clarity. Teasing him, I said, you haven't got me. Yes, I have. He replied, his eyes glazed as he tilted his head, unexpectedly taking my index finger into his mouth. I was stunned by this unexpected gesture. Johnny continued to smile foolishly. Selena, I'm yours. Johnny. Are you a dog? This seemingly innocuous question triggered something in him. He suddenly straightened up, eyes slightly squinting. Thinking he had regained his senses, he blinked and obediently nodded. I'm Selena's dog. I gave up reasoning with him and turned to survey the room. Johnny's space was modestly furnished with a bed, a desk and chair, textbooks, and papers neatly arranged, except for a huge stack of white paper under the scissors on the table. They were cut into odd patterns, looking strangely peculiar. Johnny, do you use these papers to vent your frustrations by pretending they're meat and cutting them? I mumbled to myself, not expecting a drunkard to understand. Just as I was about to throw them in the trash, he swiftly snatched them away, clutching them tightly to his chest. Johnny, throw away the trash. You can't throw away Selena, he said, holding up the shredded pieces. Light filtered through the crevices, projecting familiar faces on the white wall. Clear outlines depicted me, in different poses and actions, even holding a whip, all intricately cut out. He glanced invitingly at me, saying, Selena, I can't throw them away. I gazed in disbelief, feeling a bitter sweetness surge within me. Johnny, you really are. Without further thought, I pushed Johnny onto the bed. Opening the phone's camera, aiming at his face. Johnny, I said, are you secretly in love with me? He looked at his blurred reflection in the lens, then shook his head in pain. No, I can't like you. Selena would hate it. What a fool. Being young is great, I haven't had enough fun yet, and Johnny fell asleep. In the morning, the maid pushed the door open and was startled to see me. Miss, even if you don't like Johnny, you can't torture him all night. I didn't, I said guiltily as my eyes landed on Johnny's bruised body. I was choked up and couldn't come up with any excuses. I won't treat him like that again. The maid earnestly applied ointment to Johnny. Every now and then. She sighed at the pitiful child. I turned away feeling guilty. Peter called me all night, so I finally blocked him. He got a new phone number and continued to harass me. Selena, I admit I was impulsive yesterday, please don't ignore me. When this competition is over, I will apologize to you. Skillfully, I blocked his number. But Peter did remind me of something. The international physics competition, if you win, you can get the school's only guaranteed admission spot. In my past life, in order to secure Peter's admission, I drugged Johnny, causing him to miss the competition directly. Even though Johnny later stood firm in the field of physics on his own, if he didn't miss this opportunity, he would have taken fewer detours and faced less hardship. It was my fault. Saying I don't feel guilty would be a lie. I gritted my teeth and dragged the unconscious Johnny out of bed. Quick, have the driver ready, I'm taking Johnny to the competition, I ordered. The maid hesitated but didn't say anything. Johnny, though thin, was not light and his body was stiff. It took me great effort to get him out of the room. Downstairs, the maid and the butler were talking. Why does Miss always torment Johnny? That child seems fine to me, mature and quiet. Even when he's feverish and unconscious, she still doesn't let him off, and now she's forcing him to participate in some competition. This demon-like behavior from our miss is truly unprecedented. When Johnny was about to reach the competition venue, he woke up. Where is this? He asked. I'm taking you to the physics competition, I replied coldly, arms crossed. I hadn't forgotten what happened that night. Johnny, shouldn't you give me an explanation? Covering his forehead, he sat up slowly, a shadow of gloom between his brows. Like a little wolf cub, ready to bite anyone. Isn't he cuter when he's drunk? What explanation? Look at yourself, I leaned in, bringing my face close to his. Your lips were bitten by you. And they haven't healed yet. Are you really a dog? Johnny froze for a moment, his gaze fixed on the wound on the corner of my mouth, as if trying to bore a hole through it. After a while, he turned his head to look out the window. Do I bear any responsibility for what happened with Peter? He asked. What does that have to do with Peter? The driver interrupted. Don't you miss the competition if we delay any further? I shot Johnny a glare and handed him the prepared review bag. Study well, use your grades to humiliate Peter. Johnny glanced at me, his voice cold but determined. You had a fight with Peter. I was speechless. Yes, now everyone sees me as overly fond of Peter. As for what happened in a past life, who would believe it even if I told them? It would make me seem more like a love-struck fool with beauty but no brains. I waved my hand dismissively. Study hard for your exam, or else you'll face the consequences. Johnny walked away coldly. The physics competition lasted for several hours, and I found playing on my phone in the car to be incredibly boring. I couldn't fathom how Johnny was able to sit through it all in the exam hall till it's over. The driver exclaimed as we arrived at the school gate. Isn't that Johnny? Oh, who's the girl with him, a classmate? I looked up and saw Kathy standing next to Johnny. She had a smile on her face, chatting about something, and Johnny even cracked a smile. Seeing me there, Kathy looked a bit surprised. Why are you here? She asked. Can't I be here? Kathy responded quickly. I didn't mean that. If you're here, Peter must be very happy. He hasn't eaten in 3 days because of you. He even uttered your name when he entered the exam hall. He hasn't died of hunger yet. He's quite resilient, isn't he? With a chuckle, the driver in the front seat couldn't help but laugh. Kathy remained composed and said, Johnny, your sister is quite interesting. No wonder Peter likes her so much. She's not my sister, and I'm not his sister. Our eyes met, and Johnny cynically pulled at the corner of his mouth. How did you do in the exam? He asked, opening the car door and looking back at me calmly. You will be satisfied, he assured. With his words, I finally felt relieved. I instructed the driver to take us to the hotel. Kathy's figure gradually disappeared in the rearview mirror. We had to wait 5 days for the results to come out. Peter received the last place award. Johnny's name was nowhere to be seen. I was restless and suspected that Peter had tampered with the results. I'm calling the committee. I exclaimed. No need, Johnny said, closing his laptop. I handed in a blank paper. What did you just say? I asked in disbelief. Are you out of your mind? Johnny smirked. Peter got the guaranteed admission spot. Aren't you upset? In a flash, I remembered what Johnny had said before the exam. He had promised to make me satisfied. You thought I wanted Peter to win? Isn't that right? Why would I need to tie you up in the exam hall if I wanted Peter to win? Johnny's expression froze for a moment, but then he quickly regained his composure. Lowering his head in an indifferent tone, he said, Do you need me to torture you less? Isn't this just one of many times? As I gazed at the red marks on Johnny's neck that hadn't disappeared, I fell silent. I wandered around like a headless fly. Johnny hadn't called me in a week. He had a very low presence, especially after Peter secured the only guaranteed admission spot. He continued to keep to himself, only now he had me as a tag along. He got on the bus, and I followed. I was pushed back and forth by the crowd, and when Johnny walked over, he blocked me protectively in his arms, his face expressionless. In the evening, I went to knock on his door with the exam paper in hand, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open, and the sound of running water came from the bathroom. Through the steam-covered glass door. Even though Johnny quickly wrapped a towel around his lower body, I still caught a glimpse of him, which seemed incongruous with his slender figure. I swallowed nervously, blushing as I turned away, accusing him in advance. Johnny, you're such a pervert, showering without clothes on. With just one sentence, I successfully made his face even darker. He lingered in the bathroom for a long time, and when he came out, he was wearing long sleeves and pants. On this early summer night, he was in his room wearing a shirt with the top button fastened tightly, enveloped securely. Is there something you need? He blocked the doorway unwelcomingly. I raised the blank test paper above my head. I don't understand any of this. Can you teach me? Johnny's tone was distant. You can hire a tutor. Tutors cost money. You're getting it for free. I'm not stupid. I sighed. Even though we have money, we still need to save where we can, right? He pursed his lips and reluctantly stepped aside to let me in. On the table, I saw those paper cuttings again, thicker than last time. I asked with a grin, What's this? Just scraps of paper, he replied. Then why not throw them away? He glanced at me, moved the cuttings into a drawer, and locked it in front of me. Slowly, he said, saving is a virtue. He didn't allow any more idle talk from me, and started explaining the test questions, looking serious as if conducting a physics experiment with great concentration. After a while, he picked up the lemon water on the table and took a sip. His voice sounded a bit hoarse as he asked, "Did you understand?" I shook my head. "Can you explain it again?" He looked at me intently and began explaining the question once more. As I listened, I felt a bit thirsty, so I took a sip of water from his glass. The voice in my ear abruptly stopped. He widened his eyes, his expression blank. "You." I looked at his red ears innocently and put down the glass. "You said saving is a virtue, so I'm just following that." His face turned even redder, even his slender neck had a faint blush. He continued explaining the questions with his head down, his thick eyelashes trembling. I gently interrupted him. "You made a mistake, that's not the right question." He tightened his grip on the pen. In that moment of tearing off the mask of a big bad wolf pretending to be a little white rabbit, he finally revealed his panic. To outsiders, it seemed like Johnny and I were getting closer. Peter was very unhappy. Even if I ignored him, he would find ways to corner me in empty offices. His face full of unyielding unwillingness. "Selena, do you not want me to recommend you anymore? I can give up this opportunity for you. Don't break up with me, I really love you." Looking at his earnest face, I couldn't help but feel a moment of confusion. In my past life, I firmly believed in a saying, true love can be felt. If you can't feel it, then it's not love. So, I thought my father, who treated me like an heir to nurture, didn't love me. And I thought that Johnny, who was distant towards me, hated me. I believed in Peter's sweet words, thinking that deliberate flattery was liking, and sweet words were expressions of love. It wasn't until I woke up from my ivory tower at the cost of my life that I realized there's a kind of love that is a flower buried in the soil. Someone might put in all effort to nurture it, but not for it to bloom in the sunlight. I looked out the window and saw Johnny standing under a tree not far away. During our breaks, he would always bury himself in the classroom doing problems. Peter also saw it. He grabbed my shoulder forcefully, and his usually refined features suddenly turned fierce. Is it because of Johnny? Is it because you kissed him that night? Yes, I answered firmly. Peter let go of my shoulder, looking at me with an incredulous and absurd look. Are you crazy? You guys are siblings. He didn't know that Johnny and I had no blood relation. I threw the USB drive in my pocket at his feet. Here's your birthday gift, keep it well. In my past life, Johnny saved me and Peter didn't succeed. He was playing around, even after getting a beating. That night he took several boys and girls to a hotel. What I wanted to give him was the video from the hotel. My family didn't lose its power, and Peter didn't dare to do anything to me even when he was angry. I pushed open the door and walked out. There was no trace of Johnny under the tree. He was absent for the rest of the day's classes, and his phone was unreachable. When I returned home in the evening, Johnny's room door was closed tightly. Nanny said his friend had come to see him. I didn't remember Johnny having any particularly close friends. As I approached the door, Kathy's voice came through. She asked Johnny, "Are you really not considering going abroad with me? You need a better platform to showcase your talent in physics." Johnny was silent for a few seconds. "Thank you, but I'm not considering it." Kathy chuckled softly, with a hint of regret in her tone. "So, I have no chance with you here, right?" I knew eavesdropping was impolite, but my feet couldn't move. I longed to hear Johnny's response. He said, "Sorry." Kathy didn't seem surprised. She slowly said, "I heard Selena has been clinging to you a lot lately. Young girls are like that. Whenever they quarrel with their boyfriends, they'll try all kinds of ways to make them jealous or angry." "Do you really take her recent kindness toward you seriously?" I held back the urge to burst in, only because Johnny coldly said, "I don't take it seriously. No matter how Selena treats me, I'll willingly accept it." Kathy seemed angry. "Why are you so stubborn?" "No one knows better than me. Selena is not a good girl." Johnny interrupted Kathy. "She doesn't need to be a good girl." I couldn't take it anymore and pushed the door open. Both of them looked at me simultaneously. Kathy remained composed, showing no signs of discomfort over being caught speaking ill of me. Even her gaze towards me exuded a lofty disdain, as if she never regarded me highly since the first time we met. Only towards Johnny, she would reveal a hint of admiration and fondness hidden beneath her eyes. Thinking of this, I crouched at the door with my backpack, pitifully looking up. "Johnny, I'm hungry. Dinner is ready downstairs." My heart aches, I can't move. He stood up from his chair, walked over to me, his black eyes calm. "What do you want?" I raised my arms. Johnny looked at me, then squatted down expressionlessly. I triumphantly leaned onto him as he whispered my name with a deep desire. Suddenly, my legs felt a bit weak. The maid outside was calling for me, so I hurriedly agreed and came down. You should go quickly, or else everyone will worry. Okay. I felt something was off about Johnny now, but once we were out of the dark loft, I couldn't see any traces of it on him. As the banquet was ending, Peter rushed in from somewhere. He looked drunk, carrying a bottle of alcohol, and pointed at me and Johnny in front of everyone. Do you know, Uncle, your son and daughter are in a relationship. He smashed the bottle, shouting, shameless, this is incest. Seeing his satisfaction in causing trouble, I suddenly understood what he meant when he said I would regret it in the office that day. There were quite a few guests at the banquet, and as the news spread, people started discussing in small groups. Johnny held my hand tightly, standing in front of me. The crowd parted, and my father calmly raised his glasses. Johnny is the foster child I chose for Selena. Does anyone have any objections? Everyone was stunned. Peter, the troublemaker, was dragged out by the security in a daze. My father looked at me reassuringly. A month ago, I confessed about my relationship with Johnny. My father was stunned for a long time. He still couldn't believe it. Are you trying to play pranks on Johnny again? Not entirely. If possible, I plan on teasing him for a lifetime. As the guests dispersed, Johnny looked at me meaningfully. You knew we weren't siblings all along. He chuckled and touched my hair. Selena, we both were reborn, right? I froze, raising my head in astonishment. I could easily tease the 19-year-old Johnny. But facing the Johnny with a 29-year-old soul in his body, I was powerless. He was always, relentlessly emitting hormones. I discovered the video of him drunk that night. He leaned on his chin with a gentle smile. So, Selena likes this. My face turned red, hastily grabbing the phone. Who allowed you to look at my phone? Don't you know it's very rude to do so? I'm sorry, I was wrong. He quickly apologized, sincere in his words. But the next moment, he handed me a long whip covered in dust. His voice lowered in my ear, with a hint of seduction. So, now Selena can punish me. Facing his burning gaze, I instinctively dropped the whip that burned my hands. When choosing my college major, I deliberately chose a different city and field of study from my past life. Who would have known Johnny also chose the exact same ones as me, studying plant environment. Are you crazy? You should choose physics, I said. Physics? He laughed and shook his head, playing with my fingers, then kissing each one tenderly on the lips. I recoiled my hand in disgust, hearing him sigh deeply. Physics is too boring, being with Selena is more interesting, he quipped out. After the admission letters came out, a major incident occurred in Peter's family. Kathy died, her heart stopped suddenly and couldn't be saved. Since the two families had no relationship, no one went to pay their respects. Word about Peter's scandal spread in City A, his guaranteed admission was revoked, and he didn't take the college entrance exam. His status at home plummeted, just as his father's estranged illegitimate children came knocking, resulting in Peter being caught in a power struggle with them. But with the family's assets diminishing, what was there left to fight over? The start of freshman year was earlier, and Johnny had already rented a one-bedroom apartment outside the school. I was not pleased. Was our family that poor now, unable to even afford a bigger place? Johnny lowered his gaze, taking my hand and leading me into the only bedroom. I didn't use any family money, I earned it through part-time work. Selena, can you bear with it for a while? I was the one bearing with it. Johnny didn't seem affected at all and directly turned my bedroom into our bedroom. I missed the awkward and shy Johnny from before. In the beginning, he had been drinking, acting in an abnormal way. But in the attic, he hadn't had a drink either. The only common thing between the two instances was, perhaps, that we kissed. Reflecting on this time, Johnny kissed my cheeks, neck, collarbone, even wanting to leave marks deep within my shirt collar. But he never kissed my lips. With victory in sight, I brought home a bottle of red wine, ordered a spread of dishes for takeout. When Johnny walked in, he paused. I pushed a wineglass towards him, celebrating that we both got into the same university, that we both had a bright future ahead. Cheers, Johnny raised his glass, gave me a smile that was hard to read, then finished his drink in one go. After all, with a body as young as his, one drink was enough to make him drunk. His pale face flushed slightly. I leaned in to kiss him, but he raised a hand to stop me. With a glimmer in his eyes, he gently opened them and looked at our intertwined hands, asking, Selena? Hearing that familiar tone, I felt ecstatic. Finally, he had come back. I must say, the teenage Johnny was really easy to handle. Although stubborn, he was exceptionally obedient. Whenever I said I wanted some alone time, he would purse his lips, wordlessly holding a blanket and going to sleep on the couch. Did he even struggle to accept the reality of us being in a relationship, awkwardly expressing care? His face turning red even at the slightest touch of hands, I purchased a large box of special props online. A mini whip, handcuffs, a blindfold. Determined to wipe out past shame. I wanted Johnny to know who the master truly was. When sneaking the box home, Johnny lay resting on the couch. His forehead had a cooling patch. Selena? He rubbed his eyes, instinctively helping me move things. When I opened the box carelessly, I nervously swatted his hand away. Personal items, don't touch them. He bit his lip, pulling his hand back. Are you running a fever? I asked as he wrapped himself in a blanket, weakly nodding. Dinner's ready, on the table. I want to catch a bit of sleep first. Okay, he replied. After dinner, I felt his forehead. The fever had subsided. I yawned and went back to my room to nap for a bit. I was soon awoken by some rustling noise. With sleepy eyes, I opened them to see Johnny, who had dragged a chair to sit by my bed, a box with various strange items beside his feet that I had unpacked carelessly. Inside were different peculiar things that caught his eye. He picked up a pair of silver handcuffs, clicking them onto my wrist. He kissed my hand gently and smiled. Missed me, Selena? Johnny had always found life in the orphanage to be quite good. There was no coarse swearing or physical abuse. He never felt dizzy from hunger and had clothes to cover himself. He was already content. This contentment abruptly ended the moment he met Selena. Selena's mother had brought her to the orphanage, donating many supplies. She wore a beautiful princess dress, prettier than anyone Johnny had ever seen, even on TV. Other children flocked to Selena to make friends. Johnny wanted to join them, but looking at his own dusty reflection in a puddle, he felt out of place. Even though he didn't understand the concept of inferiority at 10, Johnny already felt he shouldn't approach her. A kind aunt smiled and asked Selena who she liked best. She pointed to 2 boys. The chosen boys cheered with joy. You can only pick one, Selena. Which little brother do you want to take home? The children at the orphanage matured early. They all understood this was about being adopted. They became even more enthusiastic, trying to please the girl by their side. They brought high-grade chocolates and lots of candies, causing a commotion among the kids. Johnny didn't join in. He turned and went to the cafeteria, where the fed children hadn't gone. Johnny was able to enjoy an extra bowl of white rice. He could taste sweetness with each bite of rice, chewing it 20 times to savor its sugary essence. Johnny imagined the taste of candy in every grain of rice. Candy might not fill the stomach, but rice could. Yet, when he saw the kids having fun with Selena, a faint hint of regret passed through his heart. Why did she choose a little brother? He could have worked hard to become a good big brother. Seeing Selena tired from playing, cradling a teddy bear under the slide, lost in thought, the 2 boys she had picked earlier yanked her up to play. The kids in the orphanage were used to hard work from a young age, strong and eager to please. They accidentally pushed Selena down. She cried out loudly. Selena's mother quickly rushed in, consoling her for a long time to stop the tears. Carrying Selena into the car, she turned to the head of the orphanage, saying, "The younger ones don't know what they're doing, they are a bit rough. Are there any older kids?" Yes. The director hurriedly called out names from a list. Johnny's name got called too. Selena's mother looked at the row of boys, eyes finally settling on Johnny. What's your name, little boy? She asked. Johnny. How old are you? 10, he replied. Selena's mother joked with the director, saying, "This child speaks so formally, like a little adult." The director agreed, "Yeah, Johnny is the most mature among kids his age." Selena's mother asked a few more questions and left without showing any intention of adoption. But that brief interaction had already led to Johnny being shunned by the other children. Later, Selena's mother came several times, but Selena never appeared again. The last time, she gently asked Johnny, "Would you like to be Selena's brother, to protect her forever and not let her suffer any harm?" Johnny thought seriously. Compared to them, he felt too small and didn't think he had the ability to protect Selena. He answered truthfully. To his surprise, Selena's mother smiled even more. "It's okay, just do your best." After that, Selena's mother never appeared again. The director lamented that Selena's mother had passed away, and it seemed that the adoption would not happen. After a long time, a middle-aged man who looked a lot like Selena arrived at the orphanage, specifically requesting to adopt Johnny. He didn't have the warmth of Selena's mother. Instead, there was coldness and sadness in his demeanor. "Johnny, from today onwards, you are my son." At home, Johnny saw Selena for the second time. She didn't welcome him, spoke harshly to him, and pushed him into the artificial lake. Everyone thought he was an illegitimate child of the man. Therefore, Johnny didn't feel wronged and didn't hold any grudges. He felt that Selena was just a poor little sister who lost her mother, a girl who couldn't find a place to vent. This pity eventually turned sour. He began to be afraid to make eye contact with Selena, afraid she would discover his dirty thoughts. Sometimes, being whipped by her felt like a release to Johnny. He kept this hidden shame and joy to himself. When Selena fell in love, he wasn't surprised at all. He didn't even have the qualification to be jealous. The seed of self-doubt in his youth sprouted in his heart, digging deeper. Sometimes, he couldn't help but meekly think, as long as I can see her, it's enough. The unspeakable degradation must be buried deep in his heart forever.